Dice Will Roll presents The War of Immortals, a summary and explanation of the events that unfolded on the day that the God of War died. Gorum had been a god of war for thousands of years, yet war existed before he rose to power, and would surely continue to exist long after he was gone. His genesis was shrouded in myth and legend. Some said that he was born from the first battles between humans and orcs. Others believed him to have been an ascended general from a long-forgotten time of battle. He had been worshipped by smiths and soldiers alike, be they those who prepare for war or those who revel in its glory. As the god of war marched towards his destination for this day, he was certainly a sight to behold. A titan standing hundreds, maybe even thousands of feet tall, clad in nothing but armor, and more armor. In every single gap where one might expect to see skin, they would see only more steel. Spikes grew from his pauldrons, and his faceplate was like that of a crown. His gauntlets were clawed, and the gold accents around his dark steel plate glinted in the light of Elysium. He was not here for war today. He was here to discuss with another god. Despite his focus on war, Gorum was not an evil god. He did not pursue battle out of a desire to spread pain or prolong suffering. Yet, over the eons, he had seen many use his teachings to do just that. Gorum knew more than most that not all battles needed or even deserved to be won, that sometimes greater strength in the future could be forged from a loss suffered today. He also knew that the time had come for him to meet a hero's end, just as many who fought in countless battles aspire to, but was aware that his death must not appear to have been engineered by himself. His skill at battle was such that he emerged time and time again from conflict as a survivor, and with each triumph, he saw those who used his legacy not to justify glory in battle, but to justify war as a tool for evil to grow. And so, today, Gorum was here to do something he'd only rarely done before. He was reaching out to another for aid. The doors into her castle were heavy, even for Gorum, and as the god of war stomped through the fine velvet carpets that made up her abode, he pushed into the throne room that she affectionately called the Red Room. Gorum stood before Calistria, the elven goddess of trickery, known across the plains for her lust and her vengeance equally. And as Gorum stood before her, with her sipping her wine, curiously eyeing up her visitor, he came to one knee, bowed his head, and said, "Calistria, I need you to orchestrate my death." Calistria was not shocked per se, but she was surprised. She asked him why her of all people, and Gorum responded frankly. Her embracing of chaos and her cunning mind meant that of all the gods in the multiverse, Gorum knew that she would be able to engineer a great battle for him to go down in a proverbial blaze of glory. The two talked for some time, and a bargain was made in secret. And all Callistria asked for in payment was a secret of his own. Callistria stood and placed a hand on the metal plate of Gorum's chest and leaned in and asked him, "Tell me, God of War, what is it that lays within your armor?" And Gorum looked at Callistria, his gaze dark between the plates in the helmet's gaps. And he said, "There is nothing." Callistria found this answer amusing and took it. The pact was sealed, and Gorum returned to his domain on the clashing shore of Elysium to return to battle, trusting that his fate would soon reveal itself. Gorum was never truly a wise god, but perhaps even he should have seen that the god of trickery would attempt to trick him too. Callistria left soon after, and made her way to the Boneyard, the realm of Pharasma, goddess of death. But it was not her that she visited, no. She paid a visit to the Blood Veil at the base of Pharasma's spire, and met with Achikek, god of assassins and divine punishment. The little elf god, while dwarfed by Gorum, was practically nothing compared to the massive red mantis that stood before her in its lair. A god created with the intent of killing pretender gods, of punishing those who wielded divine power irrationally. A god who, should he be bothered, was able to rip holes in the multiverse and kill any individual without them even realizing it. Callistria stood before Achikek, and she spoke words of heresy. She revealed to the Mantis god Gorum's own admission that within his armor was nothing. "Do you hear that, Achikek?" she told him. "My suspicions have always been that the god of war was a container filled with the violent urges of all mortal life. And I was right. Gorum has long mocked the divine by pretending to be one of us, when in fact he was little more than an empty shell fueled by boundless capacity for mortal violence." She left soon after, as Achikek does not usually respond well to visitors. And he did not believe her. Not initially. But a seed has been planted. A seed that Callistria knew Achikek could not resist nurturing. The idea that Gorum was a pretender to the ranks of the divine, and not a true god at all. Callistria had not hired the god of assassins to slay Gorum, no. But she knew that he would act on this potent idea. In time, Gorum would die. The tipping point for Achikek's anger was the result of a quarrel between his followers. A group of red mantis assassins, some of the most fearsome assassins in the lands, were following a traitorous member of their organization who had fled to Gorum's divine realm within Elysium, a region known as the Clashing Shore. As these assassins made their way through the shore, they saw him, a towering armored god appearing briefly in the distance, glancing in their direction and noticing them, before returning to the fight with whatever unseen foe he was battling. The longer these assassins stayed in the clashing shore, fighting off the forces of Gorum's divine army in their hunt for the traitor, the more Gorum began to notice them. He, just like many of the other creatures of the clashing shore, could sense that these assassins had very recently taken the life of a powerful warmongering general who worshipped Gorum. At first, this was not enough for Gorum to be distracted from battle, but as the Red Mantis assassins continued to stay here within his realm, with the blood of his followers on their hands, ultimately Gorum noticed them. It was when they finally assassinated their target that the Lord in Iron turned. As the distant thunder echoed across the clashing shore, blood-red storm clouds rose up from the horizon, churning in vortices around Gorum's body. The god turned towards the assassins. He took a step, and the world trembled. He took another, and another, building speed as his walk turns to a stride and then to a run. Immense waves spread forward as each footfall crashed down into the ocean, and then the clouds themselves began to twist and tear. There was nothing that the assassins could do as they stood in the face of such overwhelming deific doom. Nothing except watch as the ocean behind Gorum exploded, a foaming wall of water rising up behind him. From this unimaginably vast plume, a crimson blade scythes out and plunges through Gorum's back, stabbing him through the chest to emerge in a spray of metallic shrapnel. Time seemed to stand still, apart from the falling cascade of water, which revealed the towering form of Achikek standing beyond Gorum, one of his blade-like arms plunged through the god of war's torso. There was a moment of profound stillness, as he who walks in blood stands behind his prey. And then, a moment later, Achikek rips his arm aside, and the upper third of Gorum's body is torn away with a single tremendous strike that rends reality. Cracks radiate out from the execution of a god, red light shining out from within the god of war's body. As his corpse begins to topple to the ground, his armor rips open, revealing what many have long suspected. Nothing is within. Truly nothing. A black hole of hatred that was contained inside Gorum, protected by being locked away and now being released. And then Gorum's remains explode. Fire rips through the air, tearing molecule from molecule, and tsunamis are pushed forward, and blasts of blood-red shrapnel radiate outwards as Gorum's armor explodes from within. There was a sudden beam of light, red light, blasting outwards from the core of Gorum's armor, and lancing backwards towards the unseen heart of the maelstrom beyond the clashing shore. Even Achikek seemed startled by this display of power, and staggered back from his kill. The clashing shore began to rip to shreds. Achikek vanished in a cloud of blood, abandoning the site of the execution, and the assassins had to flee a crumbling afterlife. They barely escaped with their lives, but when they returned to their home on Golarion, they found that they were not the only ones to witness the death of Gorum. Indeed, every single person alive throughout the universe in that moment looked up at the sky and saw Gorum's death themselves. And that is when the Godsrain began. When stars rain down and the war god dies, the keeper of secrets becomes god of lies. As spirits move freely and grim battle rages, the audience turns to storytellers' pages. As demons devour and devils plot schemes, heroes are called to safeguard our dreams. Step now, O reader, through paper portals, and take up arms in the War of Immortals. From within the shell that was Gorum, 3 things spilled forth. The first was divinity in its purest form, droplets of molten silver that carried within them the seeds of godhood and immortality. The second was the essence of war, red and undiluted, falling like blood across all worlds where he who was war had ever been worshipped. The third was something terrible, born of the rough beast's Rovagug's essence, trapped within the war god Gorum's armor, but no longer a part of Rovagug. A perversion unto itself. As it fled our world, desperate to be free, the spirits wailed its name in terror. Devourer! Woe to those whose homes lie in the Devourer's path. Even now does the dismay of distant stars and planets echo across existence. The Godsrain, as it's come to be known across Golarion, has wrought many changes in the world. Notable among these is a rise in international tension, engendering conflict between enemies, neighbours, and friends alike. Almost as if it were his dying wish, Gorum's death spread the desire for war across the multiverse. Magic has been disrupted. In some places, lost magic has been reawakened. In others, ambient magic has grown more powerful. Conversely, there are some regions where magic has become unreliable or outright unusable. Among the biggest changes brought about by the Godsrain are those experienced by individual mortals. Many have undergone transformations, physical and even more radical. A few mortals have become Nephilim, their bodies transformed by planar energies. Others have unlocked latent abilities like sorceress bloodlines, or the might of an exemplar, a heroic, mythic champion that walks among men. Some have even received direct power from gods, becoming clerics, champions, and oracles. Most notable of the Godsrain's effects are its seeding of mythic powers throughout Golarion. As Gorum was torn asunder, blood and metal burst from his body. Massive droplets of crimson and silver began to fall from the sky, each filled with Gorum's passion for conflict. Wherever the red drops rained down upon the world, the air filled with a desire for war. The silver drops were filled with Gorum's divine potential. When they landed, they infused the environment and the people nearby with mythic power. In some cases, both kinds of rain pooled, creating loci for conflict and power. Most who witnessed the Godsrain realized its strange effects, but rare are those who truly understand the exact nature of the red and silver downpours. To most, they're one and the same, and many who've successfully found pools of Godsrain are often surprised by its effects. Finally, the living armor that was Gorum shattered into innumerable fragments. While most of these pieces were so tiny that they were simply swept away into cracks in the multiverse, larger pieces of his body remained intact. These fell upon worlds much like the red and silver drops of the Godsrain. The metal shards varied in power. Many were filled with a potential for war, like the blood-red droplets. Others possessed mythic power, like the silver droplets. And others still were simply inert ore, but unlike any metal encountered before. Dubbed war shards, these strange collections of ore possess unusual properties, many of which remain unclear or even seem to change depending on any number of variables. When the Godsrain fell, it brought awe and fear to the people of the Inner Sea. While the individual effects were countless, major political shifts have also occurred in the regions. In Absalom and Starstone Isle, the Starstone stirs. It's unclear whether the Godsrain fell upon the Starstone Cathedral and caused a disturbance, or if the event was simply a catalyst for changes within the enigmatic halls of the Starstone's home. Regardless, it's clear that something is causing the Starstone to react, almost as if in pain. Accounts of tormented screams echoing out from the cathedral have grown more frequent. Citizens of the Ascendant Court District of Absalom insist that the cathedral itself is changing. They report that the alterations are minor, ranging from new columns and rooms to indecipherable writing along the cathedral walls. All attempts to log these transformations have thus been futile, as the cathedral reverts to its original state by the time archivists and chroniclers arrive to record the changes. Worse are the strange monsters that have begun to periodically emerge from the cathedral. Locals initially dismissed the sightings as anomalies, perhaps creatures that managed to slip past the Grey Cloak guards and other city watch. The sightings increase in frequency, however, and now it's clear that strange horrors are venturing from the cathedrals at a regular rate. Starwatch, the allotment of City Watch dedicated to the entirety of Absalom proper, rather than a single district, has declared the area surrounding the Starstone Cathedral a site of emergency. Even with the emergency resources afforded to them, the agents of Starwatch have found themselves stretched thin, and so reached out to a local chapter of the Knights of Lastwall for aid in containing the cathedral's monstrosities. Dubbed the Knights of Starwatch, these survivors of the Whispering Tyrant used their extensive training to contain the so-called Starstone anomalies and work towards putting an end to these creatures once and for all. While there's been little progress towards stemming the monstrous tide, Starwatch has noticed a pattern to their intrusions. The few monsters that have slipped past them have moved intentionally, navigating the streets of Absalom with purpose. Each creature has traveled in a different direction, eventually finding an Absalom citizen. Rather than attacking or devouring the person, however, the monster carries them off, heading back to the cathedral. While each citizen has been rescued before reaching the Starstone's home, the fact that these monsters have sought out specific people rather than grabbing bystanders at random is both intriguing and concerning. Beyond the walls of Absalom, conflict is brewing among the Minotaur clans on the Isle of Kortos. As if by intention, a single warrior from each clan was hit by a shower of Godsrain, transforming them into enormous bestial monstrosities the clans are calling Warspawn. The mere presence of these Warspawn Minotaurs has stirred up territorial sentiments among the clans, and many are preparing to claim the region for themselves, with their Warspawn leading the charge. Outside the clans, another Warspawn was born from the Godsrain. This towering Minotaur claims to be the reincarnation of Vordani Voon, the warlord who lays siege to Absalom shortly after the city's founding. This new Voon was quick to create an army, and many centaurs and harpies in the region immediately flocked to him, as if by some instinctual compulsion. Vune's new army seeks to unite the warring Minotaur clans under his banner by whatever means necessary. After that, Vune's sights are set on Absalom to finish his failed siege from millennia past. Throughout the Isle of Kortos, a traveling circus tends to those who have undergone unexpected changes at the behest of the Godsrain. And a detective, his catfolk friend, and a changeling from a faraway land seek to find a way to undo the threats put to the people of Kortos. To the north, in the Broken Lands, great powers are rising to prominence among the wastes of the Sarkoris Scar, the former site of the world-wound rift through which demons came true and crusaders valiantly battled. Though local forces have worked for years to destroy the fiends left behind in the wake of the world wound, a few managed to elude destruction, biding their time. Unfortunately, the Godsrain has empowered many of these demons, elevating their strength to that of nascent demon lords. The newly empowered demonic demigods now seek to reopen the world wound so that they can return to the outer rifts from which they came, and become true demon lords in the process. The god-callers of this region have begun to fight back against the newly empowered fiends, and the Godsrain has aided their side of the conflict as well. Several long-forgotten gods have returned in the wake of the Godsrain and now fight alongside their clans. In Mendev, the Godsrain caused 9 massive spires to erupt from the grounds throughout the land. These spires emanate planar energies, each seemingly connected to a different plane of the outer sphere. Heaven, hell, the outer rifts, Elysium. While nothing has come from these spires so far, the hollow gateways at the top of each have local researchers concerned about what might be lurking within. To the south in Numeria, the second reign of stars brought not technology from space for the local barbarian tribes to co-opt, but energy from the skies. Dormant technology within the crashed spaceship now known as Silver Mountain, and throughout the region is once again active, causing countless robots to emerge from long-hidden resting places. These robots are eerily passive, marching in a set pattern throughout the land, stopping only to defend themselves when attacked. The city of Hajot Hakados has found its resources stretched thin as newly awoken androids head towards the city looking for guidance and shelter. Beneath the city, ancient engines find new power and begin to churn once more. Life in Brevoy has grown more tense. A series of earthquakes and subsequent tsunamis in the lakes of Mist and Vales have caused massive damage to the region. While recovery is underway, unexpected factions have used the disaster to make a play for power. One claims these natural disasters are heralding the return of Coral the Conqueror, the dragon-controlling king who founded the current nation of Brevoy from warring clans centuries ago. This faction, calling themselves the Children of Coral, believes that Coral will return within 4 years, one for each earthquake that hit Brevoy, and reunite the region. Meanwhile, the Brevik Truth Seekers claim that these omens are a sign from the gods that King Regent Noleski Sortova is unfit to rule, and are sowing discord throughout Brevoy. The two factions have already come to blows, and this hostility is fomenting conflict among Brevoy's already feuding houses. Amidst the growing unrest, the notorious thieves guild known as the Black Tears has quietly been amassing power. But which of these two new factions they might ally with, or indeed their ultimate goals, remains unknown. The southern reaches of the Broken Lands are battlegrounds of rulership. In Razmiran, several priests of the Church of Razmir, the living god, have found themselves gifted with newfound magical abilities thanks to the Godsrain. These priests have already publicly proclaimed themselves to be demigods and are challenging Razmir's supposed divine right to rule the nation. Razmir's lack of response to these challenges has left his citizens with two explanations. Some believe Razmir doesn't see these demigods as a threat, while others question if Razmir is avoiding the conflict, knowing that he can't actually win against these challengers. For now, the people of Razmir wait for a response, but demigods aren't ones to sit idly by when they can claim more power for themselves. Several Godsrain storms swept the lands of the river kingdoms. From each storm came an explosive growth of an area of nigh infinite resources. Fully grown trees, iron deposits, crops ready to harvest, and more would spontaneously appear at these afflicted sites. This has caused several land rushes in what were once considered undesirable parts of the region. New kingdoms sprouted overnight, small encampments built around these new quote-unquote wellsprings. Those who were quick or clever enough established defenses around these new regions, such as the Ironhold or the Kingdom of Forestfane. Others were not as fortunate and have become overrun or annexed by the likes of Timon, Libertane, and others. Rather than shared prosperity, the continued generation of these resources has sown suspicion and mistrust throughout the kingdoms. Indeed, the kingdom of Kilsella has found bountiful forests sprouting where once there was nothing but swamp. And they have had to make hasty accords with the Fae who have started to move in, all while juggling the political intrigue of having new kingdoms as their neighbours, and old kingdoms eyeing their new resources. The lands of the Eye of Dread were already a hotbed of conflict. But after the Godsrain, violence exploded throughout the region. Initially, the Knights of Lastwall made great strides to push back the undead continually flowing from the Gravelands, and even managed to reclaim sizable portions of territory. Yet, as the Godsrain poured down, thousands of their fallen knights returned from the dead, ready to fight once more. But this time, not among their brethren, but for the ranks of the Whispering Tyrant's armies. These Lost Knights, as they've become known, have the means to command the Gravelands forces, and now the Knights of Lastwall face undead who know their every tactic. Whatever progress made in the Gravelands might soon be lost, and then the Lost Knights will march outward from the Gravelands into the rest of the region. The conflict between Multhoon and Nirmatas, two rival nations, has reignited in earnest, led by jingoists, hoping to regain their dignity after the hobgoblin Ironfang invasion, which led to the creation of the nation of Oporak. They hope to do so by crushing Nirmatas and Oporak both. Unbeknownst to most in Multhoon, Suzuriel, the fearsome rider of war, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, has infiltrated the region to stoke the flames of conflict further. Her blessing has created several apocalypse riders who now lead the charge against Nirmatas. Their destructive ways have inspired many Maltuni citizens to take up arms, seeking to finish the fight once and for all. Pockets of citizens are alarmed by this development as they watch friends and neighbors succumb to a bloodthirsty rage. Nirmatas has been able to keep the Apocalypse Riders at bay, but with undead encroaching from the north, the nation is starting to become stretched thin. In Oporak, the nation of hobgoblins, the Godsrain activated an unknown failsafe within the Onyx Key, the artifact that allowed the nation to travel through the plane of Earth to a special pocket known as the Onyx Vault. The dwarves of Kragodan secretly implanted this failsafe in the artifact during negotiations at the end of the Ironfang invasion. The idea was that the dwarves could activate the failsafe and implode the artifact and the entirety of Oporak should the promises of peace with their new hobgoblin neighbors be broken. After several years, dwarves found no reason to use this failsafe and covered up its creation. The Godsrain's power has caused the failsafe to malfunction. Rather than cause Oporak to collapse and be pulled into the plane of Earth, it disrupted the power of the Onyx Key, cutting off major portions of the stone road that the hobgoblins used to travel to the Onyx Vault. Now, Opraki citizens are cut off from the stone roads, trapped within the planar paths, or simply lost. While General Azersi is doing her best to help the people recover from this tragedy and repair the Onyx Key, she's also found evidence of Kragadan's tampering. In the home of the orcs, the hold of Belkson, hope seems to prevail. Two newly ascended orc deities, Maja Firehair the Redeemer and Urich the Protector, have taken the safeguarding of Belkson very seriously. Many in Belkson see the Godsrain as a sign for the orcs to march against Tarbafon, and the ascendance of the two new gods seems to support that theory. The holds are looking to convince their leader, Ardax the Whitehair, to muster Belkson forces and make the first strike against Tarbafon, rather than wait for his armies to invade Belkson once more. Ustalav has been less fortunate. The misty lands of horror have found that, in addition to creating more undead, the Godsrain seems to have caused major changes among the populace. The 5 curses of Ustalav, as they've come to be known, initially caused a small portion of Ustalav's population to transform. An unfortunate citizen might be turned into a strange amphibious creature, a monster stitched from pieces of decaying flesh, a still-living spirit, a Moroi or Nosferatu vampire, or a were-creature. These citizens maintain their faculties, but now face fear from the rest of the populace, and many of Ustalav's cursed have been forced to form small pockets of cursed communities where they can live together in peace. Misunderstandings and tension have led to fighting between the cursed and uncursed populace, conflicts that continue to increase even as handfuls of additional citizens find themselves cursed every few weeks. Crises of fate and other divine developments haunt the sands of the Golden Road. Most obvious among the troubles is the atheist nation Rahadum's response to the Godsrain. The immediate fallout of the event caused great distress as hundreds of Rahadumi people found themselves receiving divine power that manifested in a variety of ways. While some believed that the Rain-Blessed were not at fault, having been unwillingly exposed to divinity in a manner not unlike exposure to a virulent plague, the rest of Rahadum believes that these people are criminals akin to clerics of any religion, regardless of the involuntary nature of this divine power. Rahadum's Council of Elders now seeks to reconsider their laws against the divine to account for involuntary divine gifts, but a deadlock within the council has pushed many Rahadumis to take matters into their own hands. To the east, a massive shard of Gorum's armor struck the House of Oblivion, destroying one of its massive towers and scattering thousands of stone fragments throughout the nation of Tuvia. Each of these stone fragments seems to serve as a beacon for a creature that locals have dubbed the Blasphemy Herald. The Herald is a terrifying humanoid creature with 3 faces, 2 anguished humanoid faces, and a third, completely monstrous one. When the Blasphemy Herald is seen, it takes a stone fragment and places it into its censer, where the stone burns away. This causes several divs to appear and attack everyone nearby as the Herald vanishes. Many believe that by destroying the so-called Oblivion Stones, the Herald is slowly destroying the House of Oblivion to create a gateway for Aliman, Lord of Divs, to reach the mortal universe. Now the race is on to gather each fragment, return them to the House of Oblivion, and repair the structure before the Blasphemy Herald completes its task. The Godsrain also revealed a number of previously unknown ancient libraries beneath the pyramids of Assyrian. Each library an archive created by Netis during his time as a mortal. While explorers of these archives have brought back valuable knowledge in the form of scrolls, tomes, and other writings, they've also discovered mysterious vaults at the center of each structure. Each vault is marked with glowing stone hands, dubbed the Hand of Netis. All attempts to open these vaults have failed, and anyone who touches a Hand of Netis is immediately annihilated, turned to dust and lost to the desert. The one exception was an archive located where the Genera River spills into the inner sea. Here, the explorer who was annihilated reconstituted weeks later as a being made of black and white light. The being calls themselves the Voice of Netis and purports to know the means of accessing the vaults, but is only willing to share this knowledge with those it seems worthy. As war shards fell on Katapesh, a single piece was pulled into the open caldera of Pale Mountain. This shard caused the exposed remains of Zotani, the fire bleeder, to stir. While the spawn of Rovagug remains dead, the fact that its bones quiver have caused smaller Zotani spawn to emerge from the volcano, which is very alarming. A figure from Katapesh's past, the powerful Jathum Nefeshti, has taken upon herself to investigate Zotani's state and gather a force to destroy the spawn's remains once and for all. While a few powerful individuals are already working alongside Nefeshti, she's hoping to add more to the ranks of her Templars of the Reborn Winds. Across the Inner Sea in Quadria, the abolition of slavery in 4723 AR brought about great change as liberated people made attempts to return to society. A movement to end the binding of genies and elementals appeared to be the next step in the nation's path to liberation. The Godsrain has disrupted this, however. In addition to the chaos wrought by falling magical rain and war shards, a new terrible beast has made itself known. This creature appears to be an amalgam of the 6 elements, drawn to the region due to its abundance of elemental binding magic. Known simply as the Siege, the creature roams the Quadrian wilderness, stumbling about in what appears to be a state of distress. Countless storms have rained upon the high seas in the wake of Gorum's death. While many of these storms subsided without consequence, a few had dire effects on the people and places of the high seas. The most obvious of these is the Mordant Spire, an island inhabited by secretive and protective elves. In the aftermath of Earthfall, the spire grew from the remains of Akavna, an ancient lunar goddess who died trying to prevent the meteor from striking Golarion. For millennia, the strange tower has hummed with power and whispered in Akavna's voice to the elves who lived there. A war shard struck the spire during the god's reign, embedding itself in its base. Since then, the spire began to grow, twisting upward dozens of feet at a time. Smaller, additional spires have begun to sprout alongside the main structure, bringing with them masses of land, islands raised into the sky. The elves of the Mordant Spire disagree on how to respond to these developments. The most in tune with the tower's whispering seeks to handle whatever is transpiring on their own, while others look to temporarily end their insular lifestyle and seek assistance from outsiders. The island of Hermia found itself embroiled in strange magical changes as well. The island's former leader, the powerful archdragon Menkare, was taken away in early 4720 by a convocation of other dragons who arrived from beyond the Inner Sea. These dragons presented themselves as servants of Otilaz, draconic deity of death, judgment, and learning, and stole Menkare away to be tried for unstated actions. This left the people of Promise, the island's only city, alone and without purpose. In the years since, these people have learned to thrive, managing to reassess their lives and find new motivations and goals. Unbeknownst to the Hermians, Menkare left behind a number of magical relics and artifacts that reacted to the Godsrain, causing major changes across the populace. Now, hundreds of citizens have gained draconic features, with some merely growing wings or claws, and others resembling proper dragons who walk upright. The citizenry is attempting to assess the changes and determine what steps to take next. Some are seeing this as an opportunity to mix their newfound God-gifted powers with Promise's countless magical and technological innovations, believing that the purpose of Promise is to spread and grow beyond the island of Hermia. In the Fever Sea,
The Eye of Abendago, the eternal storm that was sparked by the death of Aradin, grows more dangerous and more intense, threatening even greater damage to the region. On nearby Mediogalti Island, the leadership of the Red Mantis assassins is at odds. Aztec's involvement in the Godsrain has many Red Mantises questioning their allegiance to the guild. Blood Mistress Jacqueline, leader of the assassins, is strangely quiet about the event, while the Vernai assassins who serve her have been scrambling to rebuild trust after the traitor who nearly succeeded in a coup against their mistress. Meanwhile, in the northern reaches of the sea, the Algoltus of the undersea city of Nolinum have found a power source in the war shards that fell into the ocean depths. With these shards opening the passage outward, a magical gateway that connects to a realm known only as the Final Sea becomes not a matter of if, but when. The rules of magic have been constantly bent and twisted across the impossible lands. After the Godsrain, these rules have been outright broken. This is most obvious in Nex. Across the nation, magic is malfunctioning. Magical constructs collapse into inert materials or rampage through the streets. Flesh forges produce never-before-seen creatures or feedback that transforms flesh forgers themselves into abominations. Pockets of chaos magic now dot the landscape, as if the anomalies of the mana waste were spreading like a disease. The Council of 3 and 9 have attempted to recall all Nexian citizens from across the Inner Sea. Most notably among these are the Archlords of Nex, stationed in various advisory roles throughout the region. The Council's hope is that the additional magical knowledge these citizens can bring back will help diminish or reverse the magical upheaval. But the loyalties of many of these Archlords have changed during their years away, and Nex's vulnerable state is now ripe for political change. Much to his chagrin, the Ghost King Geb has been unable to capitalize on Nex's troubles, as the Godsrain has caused a different kind of problem in his own nation. While the nation of Geb has suffered fewer magical anomalies than Nex, the living plague has become a disaster for the region's leadership. The power of the Godsrain disrupted the reanimating magic of hundreds of undead across Geb. Rather than simply destroy them, it reverted them back to a living state, returning the individual to the point just prior to their expiration and subsequent undeath. While some reborn have subsequently died a natural death due to age or disease, most have survived and must contend with their reclaimed lives and the consequent dangers the living face in Geb. Many of the quick Geb's living citizens have taken to rehousing the reborn, with some even forming groups who hope to escape the nation or fight back against its undead leadership. The Mana Wastes have always been a region where magic is unpredictable, and the Godsrain has made things even worse. Some areas of chaotic magic now produce even more calamitous effects, like opening massive portals into other planes, or transforming large portions of the landscape into deadly terrain. Most notable among these effects are the Unmaking Stels, a trio of towering, glowing crystals that manifested in the eastern reaches of the Mana Wastes in the wake of the Godsrain. Any magical items, regardless of their nature or origin, lose their power when brought into contact with the Stels. The fact that the Stels also obliterate the last holder of the item has caused locals to give the structure a wide berth. In Jalmare, the Godsrain brought with it the rise of the Sacred Teachers, 8 faceless golden humanoids who claimed their teachings would allow students to attain great power, enlightenment, and more. The initial response from the Jalmare populace was mild disinterest. But this changed as the teacher's first students soon transformed into powerful beings in their own right. Now, many Jalmares are seeking tutelage from the sacred teachers. The teachers quickly grew selective, claiming that only 108 individuals would receive their instruction. Earning a place among these students is a difficult process, with some teachers requiring tribute and others accepting students seemingly at random. The Mwangi expanse was already dangerous due to its isolated city centers, and the Godsrain made the region all the more perilous. Many of the expanse's animals have been changed by the Godsrain. Some of these have grown to enormous size, a delight to followers of Balumdar, god of megafauna, but a disaster to those who lose their houses or fields to the massive beasts. Other animals have gained supernatural abilities like elemental powers or spellcasting, and a few have become even more intelligent, hunting prey and travelers alike with deadly cunning. The Southernlands are contending with the growing Eye of Abandago. More of the region is being lost to erosion, and fighting has begun to break out among the populace as people lose their homes to the encroaching weather. Displaced families seek shelter, but few are taking them in, as many are choosing to focus on their problems instead. Additionally, massively empowered rains now shower the region and cause massive plant growth in certain areas. While these plants help combat the erosion to a degree, others have begun to animate with a somewhat malicious intent, attacking travelers or even intentionally moving towards settlements to ravage them. In Usaro, the Godsrain filled the wizard Shosenbe with great power. Using his new abilities, Shosenbe was able to destroy the altar of Angazan and steal some of the Demon Lord's power for himself. Now calling himself Shosenbe the Demon Breaker, he rules over the majority of Usaro's populace. Mandrill-like Charuka and human alike now bend the knee to Shosenbe. This development has angered Angazan, and the Demon Lord is granting increased power to the few Usarans left who are willing to serve him. Nantambu's reaction to the Godsrain has been mostly one of wonder and charity. Students of the School of the Magambia immediately set out after the Godsrain, some to help those affected directly by the event and others to study it. Although Gorum's fate was relatively rare in the Mwangi Expanse, the event still caused panic among many other faithful. The Magambia students set out to comfort those in need, help with a return to everyday life, and teach those granted new abilities, and generally offer their services wherever possible. As the Magambia was already studying new and even some previously lost magic, the Godsrain provided a fine opportunity for new magical discoveries. Acquiring samples from the Godsrain isn't a simple matter, however, and many students find that they have to contend with powerful monsters, supernatural environments, and other strange phenomena to even approach a Godsrain pool or war shard, let alone obtain a sample and return it to Nantambu for further study. The revolutionary state of Vidrian is facing threats from two fronts, both emboldened by the Godsrain. To the east in Mazali, the child god Walkina, the living mummy and god of the sun, is using the new power he's received from the Godsrain to strengthen his army. Walkina's plan is to march on Vidrian and wipe out the corruption of outsiders that he believes lives in all Vidric hearts and cleanse the Mwangi Expanse. Meanwhile, the water to the west of Vidrian are dotted with free captains. These pirates hold a grudge against Vidrian and its navy, as the nation's revolutionaries stole or destroyed a number of free captain ships during the Vidric Revolution. These captains see the Godsrain as an opportunity to swoop in and attack a foe who is on the back foot. The fact that some of the free captain ships have gained supernatural abilities from the shards of Godsrain have made the threat all the more credible. Internally, sudden disagreements on Vidrian's road to the future in the wake of the Godsrain have left the nation unable to quickly respond to the amassing threats. As Gorum died in the skies above in Golarion and parts of his body began to rain down, Queen Abigail Troon looked up with glee. Just as soon as war shards landed in Cheliax, official Troon servants were arriving at the crash sites to collect them. The very next morning, an official decree declared that all war shards within Chelaxian borders were governed property and offered a bounty for the shards. While the initial influx of funds was enticing to some, it soon became clear that the declaration was a mere cover for House Troon to consolidate more power. Troon collectors can now enter the homes of any suspected of housing war shards illegally. Instead, they've seized other contraband, broken up illegal gatherings, and captured known fugitives. A fortunate coincidence, according to House Troon, which is increasing unrest among the populace. As for the shards, the only known fact is that all the collectors returned to the Imperial Palace in Golarion to secure the pieces away from outside eyes.
In Ravenel, the Godsrain wrought no huge upheavals or disasters, or so it seemed at first. While the red and silver rains fell like ever else, and war shards dotted the region, nothing extraordinary occurred in the immediate aftermath. A few days later, however, merchants from Kintargo set out to trade with smaller villages along the outskirts of the nation, only to find the lands empty. Entire villages had vanished, both people and buildings alike, with foundations, fences, and signs, the only evidence that a settlement had ever stood there. While only a few villages have disappeared, many in Ravenel's populace fear their home could be next. Meanwhile, rumors abound that Vyre's mysterious leaders have died or been replaced in some sort of shadowy coup. Not only was the death of Gorum visible in the skies above Nidal, but soon after, another god appeared to the Land of Shadow's citizens. Zon-Kutan. Shortly after Gorum's death, the sky turned pure white, and the falling droplets and shards seemed to freeze in the air. As Zon-Kutan touched a single war shard, it turned into a black star, along with dozens of other shards that rained down on Nidal. This vision faded in an instant, and was witnessed only by a select assortment of Nidalese. While other shards fell on Nidal, it was the midnight stars that drew the most attention. These war shards had been blessed by Zon-Kutan, and the Midnight Apostles, those few who were fortunate enough to see Zon-Kutan's vision, are now collecting the shards to forge weapons or empower their spellcasting. Among the dismal land of Isger, war shards have attracted a great amount of attention. While the nation's government is doing its best to comply with Cheliax's request to send Isgari shards to Abigail Troon, a lack of oversight and lax follow-through on the part of the local authorities has led to a number of shards going missing. These war shards have fallen into a variety of hands. Some are now kept in the Iron Rose, the palace of Lady Caltessa Ais. This ruthless priestess of Mammon is hoping to use these shards to advance her personal goals, while also currying greater favor with Cheliax and House Troon. In the abandoned town of Finder's Gulch, Ilkanya Alanor, a sadistic child of Urgatoa, is using the shards to create powerful undead armies, which she intends to use to conquer Greater Isger and claim the nation for the Pallid Princess. If Asmodeus can rule over Cheliax, and Zon-Kutan can hold his dominion over Nidal, surely Urgatoa could claim a nation for herself as well. Hidden among the populace of Sarangallo is a group known as the Hellbreakers League. This group of upstart revolutionaries hopes to break Cheliax's hold over Isger once and for all, but knows that the nation's leader, Hedvend VI, stands in their way. They hope that the few shards of Godsrain they manage to gather can grant them the advantage when they assault the throne. Many eyes are set on Elidir, and it's only a matter of time before someone makes the first move on the capital.
The people of the Sagalands are no strangers to powerful magic, but the effects of the Godsrain were beyond anything they've ever encountered. In the center of Lake Skota, in the western reaches of Verizia's Storval Plateau, lies a small island that local giants called Korak's Tomb. While all tales of the tomb describe it as a final resting place of Korak, an ancient giant warlord, any past attempts to explore the island were met with bombardments of rocks and rune-carved ballista bolts. After a war shard struck the island, Korak began to stir, much to the fear of the stone giant clans that had dedicated itself to serving as the island's guardians. While Korak was indeed an ancient warlord, he wasn't a typical giant. Korak was a gigas, a long-forgotten progenitor to modern giants. The clan now watches helplessly as the wards on Korak's prison fail, the hope that they can rally the other giant clans in time once more to stop the Gigas warlord, as was done millennia ago. Border disputes within New Tassilon continue, exacerbated by the Godsrain. As reigns and war shards fall throughout the region, the unclear boundaries between Zin Idasaril and Zin Shalist have led to the two Rune Lord leaders arguing over the new fallen mythic resources. While this squabbling hasn't led to outright war quite yet, it seems it's only a matter of time before Rune Lord Bellamarius and Queen Sorsen use force to make their borders known. Adding to the tension in New Tassilon is the sight of what some have dubbed the Trinity Star. A war shard of particular note, it had 3 tails when it fell from the sky. Each tail was a different color, one blood red, one jet black, and the largest an iridescent display. The war shard seemed to land in the northwestern reaches of the Kodar Mountains, but it's unclear if it landed in New Tassilon or the region that's within the borders of the lands of the Lenorm Kings. Both nations have laid claim to the star, but since no scout has been able to locate it, both nations are now pointing fingers, accusing the other of stealing the war shard. The rumoured return of Opir Eightfingers, seemingly hiding among the Kodar Mountains after his failed raids against Zin Edisaril, has complicated matters even more. Word is that the former Lenorm king now claims the Trinity Star and is attempting to assert that he has dominion over a portion of the mountain range, which will become the nation of New Opir.
In the province of Bleakmarch in northwestern Irison, the sudden appearance of an enormous tree has prompted awe and curiosity. This tree grows so tall it seems to reach beyond the mortal universe into other planes. Around its base is a humble village, one where its locals have no memories of their past before the appearance of the tree. The village has a variety of people and fae living in harmony, inviting others to live beside the tree or even among the tree's branches. Queen Anastasia, yes, that one, has sent an envoy to the tree and its village out of propriety, but currently seems more focused on a device said to be in development deep beneath her palace. While rumors about the device vary wildly, they all seem to agree that it uses Stasian technology, Tesla coils and lightning bolts and the likes. The clans of the realm of the Mammoth Lords have known conflict for a long time. Survival in the harsh environment is an everyday struggle. Disputes between clans are common, and there are even occasional battles among local giants. In the wake of the Godsrain, a new source of conflict has arisen. A warrior calling himself the Reclaimer. Commanding an army not of warriors but beasts, the Reclaimer has begun marching throughout the region, slaughtering anyone he encounters, regardless of allegiance, ancestry, or following. Dozens of megafauna and countless animals march at his side, attacking anyone who isn't an animal. The Reclaimer demands that the lands return to nature, and he has taken it upon himself to clear the region of all people. The ever-growing threat of the Reclaimer has inspired some of the region's clans to ally with former enemies, including giants, to stop the army of beasts. The Godsrain spells opportunity for many of the nations of the Shining Kingdoms. While initial re-election prospects seemed cool for the Supreme-elect Andira Musarek of Andoran, the sight of Gorum's death filled the nation with fear. Musarek's leadership and compassion shined when compared to her opponents, earning her a third and final term. Andira's consuls have pushed hard for the nation to consolidate as much power as possible from the Godsrain, as the writing on the wall suggests Cheliax is going to do the same for the purpose of war. Andira is now trying to find a balance between keeping abreast of her neighbours without having Andoran come across as warmongering. That many of her consuls seem intent on mobilizing forces, and are even skirting the powers of their position to do so, is making her task all the more difficult. Taldor, on the other hand, is not afraid to make use of the Godsrain. Recognizing the potential of this new resource, Grand Princess Eutropia issued a bounty for the best use of the Godsrain pools and war shards in ways that can, quote, better the lives and legacies of the people of Taldor. The nation is even issuing grants to fund this research. Unfortunately, muddled bureaucracy has made accessing these grants and government-issued Godsrain samples easy, with little oversight. What was originally intended as a way to develop new socially minded technologies has been twisted by many noble houses, and any of the rootless intent of Taldor, to obtain money and untapped power. Combating this from the shadows, a vigilante by the name of the Fading Fox seems to be taking matters into their own mysterious hands, and stealing war shards from the Taldan nobility that puts them to ill use. Galt's most recent upheaval brought about a somewhat tenuous stability. After the fall of the Grey Gardeners, the executioners who walked the streets of this revolutionary nation and guillotined those who spoke against them, the nation seemed on a new path during the years of rebuilding. The Godsrain might upend all of that progress. As war shards and crimson rain fell onto the lands of Galt, they awoke the shattered pieces of the final blades left in the nation. Animated as beings made of razor shards and held together by the remnants of the grey debt formerly contained within, these so-called grey blades are intent on ending the lineage of anyone related to the causes of troubles past. These living blades seek out anyone, from direct spouse to distant cousin, of those who put a person to death using the given final blade. Complicating matters even more are the Broken Ghosts, a group of anarchists attempting to push Galt into its purest, most chaotic form, believing to be the greatest expression of freedom. More people are beginning to believe in the ideology on the grounds that the personal freedom that would come with such a state is more appealing than anything a government could provide. The coin-worshipping Callistocrats of Druma are of two minds with the Godsrain. This presents an opportunity for more trade and riches. Shards of a god's body would fetch a great price, or even serve as the greatest centerpiece for a collection of wealth. Surely enlightenment is within the reach of those who collect these shards. The shards have disturbed other Callistocrats who had already achieved the pinnacle of Callistocratic enlightenment. These self-mummified beings ended their life by completing Callistocratic rituals that keep the person's soul from reaching the afterlife. The person instead lives out their own custom afterlife in a personal, eternal mindscape fueled by coins they earned in life. The Godsrain has shaken many of these Callistocrats from their afterlife, awakening them in a fugue state. Many of those awoken Callistocrats have reacted poorly from being taken from their promised paradise, and now walk the streets as strange beings seeking peace. Part undead, part construct, the broken prophets are sometimes violent, and many Callistocrats are trying to find a way to revert them to their slumbering state. In Kyonin, lost and forgotten Idura, the elf gates that teleport you from place to place in standing stones, taught non-functioning are now activating on their own, opening gateways to places unknown. Kyonin's people are able to deactivate most of these elf gates themselves before anything unwanted makes its way through. But the gates seem to have a mind of their own and continue to stretch the nation's magical resources thin. From deep within his prison of Tanglebriar, Tree Razor watches as the nation's defenses grow vulnerable. Due to their insulating layer of rock, the Five King Mountains are relatively unaffected by the Godsrain, beyond the more typical effects of the shards. Within Highhelm, the Torag Shield project is nearly finished, with an estimated completion date of early 4725 AR, as they build a giant shield that could protect the mountains from any attack. However, the Godsrain has affected one notable individual in the region. The mighty Cinder Archdragon, Daralatixel, who hasn't been seen in decades, and he has been reborn. While previously too old and aging and potentially even dying, Daralatixel has been reborn, brimming with the vigor and youth of his younger days, but with all the power that comes with his ancient status. Daralatixel sees an opportunity to truly make good of his title as the sixth king of the Five King Mountains. With a legion of children and other draconic followers in tow, it would be a simple matter for Darlaxel to earn his place as emperor of the land, or even a god among dragons. Great events have happened across the world as well, beyond the Inner Sea. In the lands of Arcadia, we see events such as metal wars and the return of the great monster Quetzalcoatl. In Casmoran, the bride Viderisis, chaos in Kalesh, and thunder on the plains bring great changes to the mighty continent. Indeed, Tiansha has its fair number of issues as well. Hao Jin, known as the Ruby Phoenix, was famous for her creation of the Hao Jin tapestry, where she stored several civilizations on the brink of destruction, as well as dangerous or imperiled artifacts. Her return to Golarion after centuries away had been challenging, due to several assassination attempts and the rise of enemies both old and new. Despite these trials, Hao Jin has flourished in the present and become even more famous and well known throughout Tiansha for her magical prowess. With the advent of the Godsrain, much of Tiansha's population turned to the Ruby Phoenix for an explanation or for help. While Hao Jin was as surprised by the events as everyone else, she was quick to set about helping protect the populace. In the immediate aftermath, Hao Jin was a hero. As a desire for conflict seeped into the hearts of the populace, however, this sentiment began to sour. Hao Jin spent some time after the Godsrain collecting what war shards she could and studying the effects of the pools that accumulated throughout the continent. As she traveled throughout Tiansha, accusations that the Ruby Phoenix was simply gathering more power for her own selfish reasons began to surface. It wasn't long before Hao Jin arrived at a destination only to encounter local guards or the people of a village ready to turn her away. Rather than test the patience of the people, Hao Jin simply moved on, finding continued resistance along the way. Most recently, accusations against Hao Jin have escalated to the point that a not insignificant portion of people now believe Hao Jin had some hand in killing Gorum and bringing about the Godsrain. They claim that only someone as powerful as Hao Jin would be capable of killing a god and cursing Tiansha with the terrible calamities brought upon by the Godsrain. A movement to bring Hao Jin to justice has formed, led by a woman named Mistress Peony, and some of its members are calling for the head of the Ruby Phoenix. Mistress Peony was the ruler of Yonji Island, an island off the eastern coast of Huanggo, built on a cluster of giant lotus flowers she created through magic. In memories past, the envious Mistress Peony challenged Hao Jin to a test of magical skill that eventually resulted in Mistress Peony attempting to trap the Ruby Phoenix in the demiplane in a desperate attempt to win the challenge. Hao Jin was too clever to fall for this trap and turned the tables on Mistress Peony, trapping the Enchantress and all of Yonji Island within the Hao Jin tapestry. The Godsrain had the unexpected effect of liberating Mistress Peony and her island, a consequence that wasn't immediately obvious to Hao Jin. The now free Mistress Peony is hoping to garner enough followers to challenge the might of the Ruby Phoenix and exact her vengeance. Although Hao Jin has been unable to prioritize recapturing Mistress Peony, 3 of her most powerful champions certainly chase her down.
And yet, perhaps the greatest effects of the War of Immortals were not those on the living, but the eponymous immortals who went to war. With Gorum's death, many gods already prone to violence either saw great opportunity or were driven to exercise their more violent impulses. What came to follow were the deaths of dozens of gods, some obscure and some very well known. The first were the Imperial Lord Smead, the pitiless dragon slayer, an angelic demigod who sought out the soul of Gorum's fallen servant, Saint Fang, the armored dragon. Driven to desperation by the loss of his master and his own transition through death and resurrection, Saint Fang eagerly joined Smead's campaign against evil dragons, and over the course of only a few days, the two slew dozens of evil dragons across the globe. Saint Fang became the first and sadly last avenger in the Church of Smead, as god and dragon waged a two-being war on evil dragonkind. Perhaps the world would be a very different place if the two had not pressed their war so hard and quickly, safer and more secure from draconic predation. Such was not to be, however. Smead and St. Fang's campaign was answered by Dayhawk, the Great Darkness, originator of all evil dragons. It seemed unlikely that Dayhawk was drawn out of any concern for the slain evil dragons. Perhaps instead it was wounded pride at the idea that Smead and St. Fang might exceed Dayhawk's own status as the preeminent slayer of dragons. Regardless of Dayhawk's motives, his intervention was swift and lethal. Smead was the first to fall, his blade shattering against Dayhawk's scales, and his godly arm torn from his body in the same instant. St. Fang's death, the second in a painfully short time frame, was slower and much more terrible. The great dragon was toyed with by the greater god and eaten bite by bite over the course of several weeks in a fight that was no fight at all, but rather an undignified slaughter. To the north, at the Sarkoris Scar, the land which was once the World Wound, the people had their own gods that they could summon themselves. The God Callers, as they were known, tell of this story. We knew that the Godsrain bode ill, even without the spectre of Gorum's rended armor. As the rains fell, the demons stirred and gathered in the heart of the wastes, where the lost heroes drove back the forces of Descari and sealed the world wound behind them. Alas, Storovenin, mighty dragon eagle, son of the first and greatest lost gods of old Sarkoris. How brightly shone your gleaming feathers, how swiftly struck your talons. Never did you waver, never did your battle to protect our people cease. When the war shard fell upon the wound, and the demons began their dance, we knew fear. Let not the wound reopen. Let us not return to those days of darkness, we beg. Storovenin flew swift and true, while my apprentices and I rode with him and his dawn-feathered children into the breach. The rainbow wings shone bright as demons boiled away like smoke, but still they crawled from every crevice, as though they knew this was their final chance to tear open our world anew. Almighty God knew what must be done. He set me down upon the ground and bade me guide the children well. Then flew Storovenin through blistering hordes and took him up the warshard, raising it high above the ground with wings outstretched. As warshard and god exploded in 1,000 gleaming rainbows, my soul screamed a final cry of loss that still echoes within me, and shall forevermore. Bless you, Storovenin, kindest of gods and leader to the end. Bless your dawn-feathered children who guard us still. When my days are done, I shall seek you in the river of souls. I dread eternity without the shelter of your wings. Courageheart, herald of Milani, and the Apocalypse Rider Suzuriel were far from the only beings to defy the dangers of eternal destruction and break the restrictions on combat between gods. When the Godsrain fell, a war shard wreathed in drops of red and silver crashed near the gates of Larad, a large dwarven city in the Five King Mountains. And the primordial being Utolmens foresaw that from this seed might grow a threat that could harm the very physics of reality. Otolmens was a primordial inevitable who tirelessly watched over the universe for supernatural anomalies that threatened physics and mathematics, and sent agents to investigate and correct them. They were a mechanical being with multiple limbs and heads who spun like an ori when active. Otolmens believed that the only way to end this threat was to wipe Larad and all who might have been exposed to the war shroud from existence. But then intervened Grundinar, son of the dwarven god Torag and deity of friendship and loyalty. Grundinar would not let dwarven lives end for fear of what might be. An ancient primordial and a dwarven god clashed, and many a dwarven hero rushed to aid their deity, fell dead, and then rose as ascended celestials on the spot to continue the battle. The conflict ended in a mighty flash and roar, and when it cleared, Grundinar, Otolmens, and all but a handful of the dwarven heroes were gone, as though they'd never been in the first place. Elsewhere there was Cernunnos, a mercurial Azata imperial lord who embodied the wild and primeval force of nature. Once he stealthily ventured through the forests of the great beyond, favoring decisive action to tide off the forces of evil. The Stag Lord aimed to set right natural balances that are out of kilter and indulged in his passions. He was the son of Erastil and Jadi and the brother of Halkamora, and he danced between the drops of the Godsrain with bow in hand. His prey was Garza, the primal king and brother of Dayhawk, the first primal dragon. Garza and Cernunnos battled across Golarion, Akaton, and the stars beyond, each seeking the other's death, each reveling in their battle for dominance. Ultimately, in traps woven of wild magic that confounded and misled Cernunnos, it was Garza who ultimately claimed victory. When the Stag Lord made his final attack, he found not Garza, but a hole in the stars themselves into which he was drawn, cast far beyond the boundaries of the dark tapestry where he was lost.
When the Godsrain fell, a white fire burned beneath the waves of the inner sea north of Sotis, capital of Assyrian, the land of pyramids. Netis and Tot both appeared in all their splendor, gods of knowledge revered in the area. They pulled the glow from the sea, and it greeted both gods of magic in its glory. At first they appeared united in their goal of protecting Great Assyrian from the fallout of this dread event, though it soon became clear that they warred over control of the gathered power. Ultimately, 'twas the all-seeing eye Netis who prevailed, and Tot was cast from this world like a shooting star, disappearing beyond sight or cognizance. One must question if Netis, even in his infinite knowledge, could have predicted that this battle between gods of magic would prove the precursor to an event of even more staggering consequence. As Netis returned to his divine realm, a great whirlpool appeared in the place where he had battled, and the hag goddess Girona, Mistama, and Alzra formed a coven there and performed some great workings. Then did all the old gods of Assyrian rise to end the hag's threat. But even the combined power of Ra, Horus, Anubis, Osiris, Maat, and Isis seemed unable to penetrate the barrier of magic surrounding the coven. As the ritual reached its zenith, it seemed certain that whatever the dark goddesses sought should surely come to be. But Girona blinked and stuttered, her words that echoed across the region in an unknown tongue stumbling for but a moment. In that instant, the combined gods of Assyrian shattered the barrier, and both they and the hags were pulled into a great nothingness. Many sages, as well as priests of the lost deities, claim to have seen visions of another world, both like and unlike our own, where the gods came to rest. But whatever and wherever that place might be, none may say. All we know for certain is that the prayers to the old gods of Assyrian now go unanswered. In Belkzen, the land of orcs, this tale is told. Long did the old gods sit upon their thrones of bone and blood. Verex the despoiler, Zagresh the destroyer, Lanishra Sazelrian. Their cruelty and power spoke to our strength and our failings. They marked what we had been and sought to claim what we could be. But we are orcs. We bow only on broken knees. When battle claims us and our lungs fill with blood, we warn the gods of our coming. Verex was weak. The despoiler became the despoiled, taken by Rovagug's power. No one seeks the unworthy's empty throne, and no death right shall free him from his torment. Only a true and final debt, as he has become a mythic monster, a spawn of Rovagug in his own right, in his quest to chase the rough beast's power. Zagresh fell to Grask Uldet's blade, one of our former leaders, who sacrificed himself in order to keep the Whispering Tyrant from taking our lives. In the boneyard, the two came to blows with one another, and when Grask Uldet bet our god Zagresh, Grask became a god instead. Grask then went and planted that blade between Torag's ribs to show the dwarves our wrath. A punishment for Torag pushing the dwarves to the quest for the sky and murdering our ancestors. Grask would have killed Torag too, had it not been for another new orc god, Ulrich, who saved Torag's life and tanks for Torag's mentorship role. There are some among us who argue whether Ulrich has betrayed the orcs or not. But, from what I understand, similar arguments are made on the dwarven side, seeing if Torag has betrayed the dwarves. It would appear that Torag and Ulrich both consider themselves good friends and see a future for orc and dwarf together. Indeed, Lanishra could not stand before Ulrich Reaversbane, scarred and unbroken, the hero who stands. No tyrant could hope to escape his justice, and it was her that he killed in order to become a god. Ulrich's fist protects us, as he teaches us that the fist must guard those weaker than ourselves. The strong must rule that the weak might learn from their strength and become strong in turn. The old ways crumble beneath us. Dromars play a song of new beginnings on drums that echo across Belkzen, our trial and our home. The weak gods fall, the strong rise, a new era for orcs begin. Let tyrants who whisper in crumbling towers tremble. We have not fallen, and we have not forgotten. This age is ours. And yet, the orc gods who rose to power by slaying the former gods are not the only new gods. For inside Gorum's armor, there was the Devourer. It is a new deity, an embodiment of ruin on a galactic scale, born from the acts of other deities in ages long past. Thanks to Gorum and Torag, a sliver of the deity Rovagug was bound inside Gorum's armor, turning the deity of war into an eternal prison for the rough beast. Inside Gorum, the sliver festered, changing and warping into something new. When it was released, it ascended into the cosmos. The Star-Eater Devourer, the Star-Eater, has no concept of worship, its nascent following, or even that it exists among a pantheon of other deities. It's a being of pure, primal force that seeks the fruition of complete universal entropy.
The only thing the Devourer wants is for everything to end, and its every action is in pursuit of that total goal. It embodies devastation and undoing at a level that goes beyond most mortal comprehension, moving beyond everyday events that more personify Rovagug's destructive nature. The Devourer represents events that destroy stars and entire worlds. While most people have little understanding of the concept of a black hole or a supernova, the Devourer is a being who seeks to enact such events throughout the galaxy. Though few in divine circles have had time to truly comprehend the ramification of the Devourer's birth, or more accurately, its emancipation from the prison of Gorum's armor. Countless cults have already begun to form around its intangible, apocalyptic visions seen in dreams or from the ongoing ramifications of the Godsrain itself. So far, only a handful of these cults have blossomed on Golarion, as the Devourer seems instinctively apprehensive of the worlds that act as a prison to Rovagug. The same cannot be said for worlds beyond Golarion, and even nearby worlds such as Akaton and Castrovel are already beginning to see the burgeoning of destructive cults of the Devourer. Some cults are almost entirely as damaging as they are self-destructive, with splintered leadership and rash actions often leading to infighting that quickly spreads out to encompass communities or nations in its entire nations in its wake. The Devourer has no appearance of its own, for to have an appearance is to create. It can only take what is already made, and often will appear as a silhouette of existing creatures. But in its rawest form, it is a black hole with the shadows of long grasping hands opening and closing, hoping to snatch away the stuff of space itself.
Little is known as to what will happen in the War of Immortals yet. Orcs rally to battle. Demons from the Tanglebriar eye up their elven prey. But hope presides as well. Perhaps in a few centuries we will look back on the Godsrain and the gods who died during the War of Immortals and know that it led to a better world. Or perhaps it shall all lead to our doom.
Every hero strikes out on their adventure for a different reason.
To prove myself worthy of my mother's praise.
To write my own story and discover who I really am.
To prove to my family that I am more than they believe me to be.
To revive the god that has chosen me.
But when the fragile balance of the world is in jeopardy, and sinister forces move in the darkness, heroes will be tested, pushed to their limits and beyond. And it will be left to them to determine if they are up to the task. There is a darkness rising. Will they be able to overcome the challenges and meet this evil head-on?
For my god.
For my story.
For my freedom.
For the world.
To restore the balance. Modified Role Season 2, The Chronicles of Erin, a D&D 5e actual play podcast. New season, new characters, new story. Find us on all the usual podcasting apps or at modifiedrole.com.